The phone hummed a low, metallic note against the polished oak of the coffee table. I sat on my ancestral sofa, staring out at the relentless, silver rain washing over the Cascade foothills outside Seattle, Washington. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 31 years old, and I am a master woodworker and furniture restorer. I specialize in bringing old heirlooms back to life in the workshop my grandfather built. Serafina Bell was in the next room, the kitchen, supposedly heating water for her evening chamomile. We'd been sharing this old Tudor-style house for 8 months. She was the anchor I'd needed when I posted that desperate ad on a local community board, seeking someone to split the crushing mortgage inherited with the house. The message was from her. Elias, please come here. I need to show you something. 6 simple words. She was, quite literally, 15 feet away. I could hear the soft, rhythmic clink of ceramic mugs being prepared, the low sigh of the whistling kettle. Why text? Why not just call out my name? That deliberate choice, the digital formality over the spoken word, sent a tremor through my composure. My hands, calloused and steady from years of handling chisels and planes, trembled slightly as I placed the phone down. This precise moment, suspended between the drumming rain and that cryptic message, was the point of no return. It was when I finally allowed myself to articulate the terrifying, wonderful truth. What I felt for Serafina was no longer comfortable companionship or mere gratitude for split rent. I was profoundly and irrevocably in love with my roommate. And I had absolutely no idea what she needed to show me. But to understand the weight of that message, you need the blueprints of how we arrived here. The story does not start with a text. It begins 5 months earlier, on a cold Wednesday morning. Chapter 2, The Soft Sound of Breaking. Before Serafina arrived, I had convinced myself that I preferred the solitude of the empty house. After a painful breakup had hollowed out my life 2 years prior, the quiet felt necessary. I could work in my workshop until midnight without complaints about the noise of the belt sander. I could eat a cold meal standing over the kitchen sink. I could go days communicating solely with my tools. But the monthly mortgage payment on this beautiful, historic house, a legacy from my brilliant grandfather, was steadily consuming my income. Pride, I learned, cannot pay a utility bill. Serafina had been the perfect candidate for the spare room. Poised, meticulous, quiet. She worked remotely as a brand strategist and digital artist, which meant she was present but never intrusive. She paid her deposit promptly, offered impeccable references, and asked no probing questions about a carpenter who lived in a house filled with custom crown molding and antique fixtures far exceeding his apparent income bracket. For the first 4 months, our lives were a carefully choreographed dance of courtesy. Reserved morning greetings, shared lists for flour and coffee creamer stuck to the refrigerator, and careful navigation around each other's schedules. She spent her days at the dining table, enveloped by her laptop, sketch pads, and color palettes. I spent mine restoring forgotten relics in the garage. We were 2 courteous strangers, sharing the geometry of a space. This rigid arrangement was exactly what I thought I wanted, until that Wednesday morning when I found her crying. I came downstairs earlier than usual, intending to grab coffee before heading to a job site for a custom library installation. Serafina was already seated at the table, still wearing a soft, gray robe, staring down at a bowl of oatmeal that had long ago surrendered to the milk. Her shoulders were shuddering with a silent, controlled grief. I paused in the doorway. My default was to retreat, to honor the boundary we had so carefully erected. But the sight of her utter defeat twisted something protective in my chest. Serafina. I whispered. Are you all right? She looked up, startled, rapidly wiping her eyes with the cuff of her robe. Oh, Elias. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you. She gestured vaguely toward her laptop, which displayed a fractured interface design. It's work. Just, client work. I poured my coffee, stealing glances. Her dark hair was loosely gathered, and her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a striking clarity, a luminous emerald green that suddenly felt vital and breathtaking. She'd been in my house for 5 months, and this was the first moment I allowed myself to see her, truly see her, beyond the veneer of roommate. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, the words surprising me with their genuine warmth. She considered me for a long moment, assessing my trustworthiness. Then, she let out a short, broken laugh, a sound poised precariously between despair and dark humor. "My flagship client just terminated the contract," she confessed. "Apparently, my strategic branding vision lacks dynamic synergy with their evolving digital footprint." She air-quoted the corporate jargon, her voice trembling. 3 months of intensive labor, and they are refusing payment. They claim I missed the brief, even though I followed their specifications to the letter. I don't know how I'm going to make the next rent payment." I sat down across from her, the warmth of the coffee mug inadequate against the sudden chill of her fear. "That's reprehensible. Can you fight the charge?" "With what money?" She sighed, pushing the mushy oatmeal away. "I'm already drowning in student loan debt. That project was meant to secure me for the entire quarter. I don't know what to do." The sheer human vulnerability of her distress struck me with unexpected force. Here was the woman I'd been so careful to keep at a distance, now stripped bare by circumstance, struggling, entirely human. My heart ached. "Hey," I said, leaning forward. "Let's table the rent discussion, okay? We'll figure something out." She looked up, a sharp, fierce defiance in her eyes. "I can't let you cover for me. That's completely unfair. You're not asking. I'm offering." The words flowed, driven by an instinct I couldn't rationalize. "Look, I know what financial pressure feels like. This house, it's been in my family for 3 generations. But keeping up with the maintenance, the taxes, the mortgage, sometimes it feels like a glorious, impossible weight. Some months, I eat canned beans for 2 weeks just to meet the mortgage deadline. We're both here, Serafina. We're both just trying to build a life. Maybe we can help each other." She stared at me, her eyes refilling with fresh tears. "Why would you do that, Elias? You barely know me." "Why indeed?" I pondered the question. Why was I breaking my own rules for this near stranger? But looking at her, small and defeated yet fighting so hard to maintain her composure, I realized the lie: she didn't feel like a stranger anymore. "Because you're a good person," I said, the truth settling on me like dust motes in sunlight. "And because everyone deserves someone in their corner when the world decides to be cruel." That was the beginning. Not of a romance, but of a genuine, fragile friendship. Chapter 3, The Dangerous Territory of Shared Space. Over the following weeks, Serafina dove headlong into finding new work, and I took on every weekend and evening restoration project I could find to cover the temporary financial shortfall. More importantly, we began to talk. Really talk. I learned she'd moved from New York after a stifling corporate job and a stagnant relationship imploded simultaneously. She chose brand strategy because it required the unique marriage of art and analytical problem-solving. She learned that I hadn't planned to be a carpenter. I'd been studying comparative literature before my grandfather's final illness brought me home to care for him. I discovered a deep, resonant satisfaction in working with wood, but sometimes missed the world of abstract ideas and narrative structure. Our conversations, initially confined to the kitchen over morning coffee, quickly expanded. Shared dinners became routine. We navigated farmers' markets together on Saturday mornings, trading suggestions for ingredients. We spent quiet evenings on the couch, watching old films, our shoulders occasionally touching. Serafina worked at the dining table during the day, and I would join her in the evenings, reading classical texts or sketching out the intricate joinery for a cabinet. We developed an effortless rhythm, a comforting domesticity that felt profoundly natural and entirely unforced. I began to look forward to coming home with an urgency I hadn't felt in years. After long days of dusty labor, the prospect of Serafina's genuine smile and her insightful questions about the challenges of my craft became the reward, the cornerstone of my routine. It was 6 weeks after that tearful morning that I realized my feelings had crossed into hazardous territory. Serafina was showing me a mood board she had designed for a boutique tea merchant, explaining the intentional use of muted earth tones and elegant, minimalist typography. She was animated, deeply passionate, her face illuminated by the light of the laptop screen. I found myself entirely distracted from the aesthetics of her work. I was watching the delicate movement of her lips as she spoke, noting the automatic gesture she made of tucking a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear when concentrating. A warm, urgent sensation, undeniably romantic, began to unfurl in my chest. "What do you think, Elias?" she asked, turning the screen toward me. "Is the composition too sparse, or does it convey the necessary tranquility?" I forced my gaze onto the image, a stylized mandala of tea leaves forming an elegant emblem. "It's exquisite," I managed, meaning every word. "It tells a rich story without relying on cliché. That level of economy is difficult to achieve." She beamed at the compliment, and that dangerous warmth spread further through my system, sparking a low-level panic. "This is bad. This is very bad." Serafina was my roommate, my trusted friend, someone who depended on the stability of our platonic, coexisting arrangement. The last thing she needed was for me to introduce the destructive complication of unwanted, overwhelming romantic desire. But knowing something is illogical and being able to command your heart to stop feeling it are two entirely different things. Chapter 4, The Retreat and the Miscommunication. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of every facet of her presence, the low, absent-minded humming she produced while waiting for the kettle to boil, the melodic sound of her laughter while watching old sitcoms in the living room, the fleeting, casual way her hand might brush my arm when she emphasized a point during conversation. To protect the valuable friendship we had built, and to avoid the imminent risk of confessing my feelings and watching everything shatter, I began working later. I sought out new, distant projects. Anything to avoid prolonged periods in the house where I might say or do something that would irrevocably alter our perfect, precarious equilibrium. But Serafina noticed my calculated absence. "Are you avoiding me, Elias?" she asked one evening. I had arrived home close to 9. She was rinsing the dinner dishes, her back to me. She didn't raise her voice. "No, of course not," I said too quickly, the lie a sharp edge in the quiet kitchen. "Just swamped with the library installation." The client added extra shelving. She stopped washing and turned to face me, drying her hands slowly on a linen towel. Her luminous eyes searched mine, and the light in the kitchen seemed to dim around her gaze. "Elias. Tell me the truth. Did I do something wrong? Because for the last fortnight, you've been acting like you can barely tolerate breathing the same air as me." The hurt in her voice was devastating. This, I realized, was the precise outcome I had been trying to prevent. My attempts at protection had only caused her pain and suspicion. "You didn't do anything wrong," I insisted. "I'm just dealing with personal turbulence." "What kind of turbulence?" Her expression softened, replacing accusation with genuine concern. "Perhaps I could help." I nearly laughed at the devastating irony. The turbulence was her. It was the growing, terrifying certainty that I was falling hopelessly in love with a woman who only saw me as a dependable housemate and friend. "It's not something you can assist with," I murmured. "Try me," she challenged, taking a slight step closer. We stood in the narrow kitchen space, the air thick and charged. I wondered what intricate analysis her strategic mind was running on my evasiveness. I could have told her then. I could have unleashed the flood of affection, the fear, the desire that was suffocating me. But the fear of the catastrophic outcome, the awkward rejection, the necessity of her moving out, the destruction of the domestic life we shared, was too potent. So, I did the cowardly thing. I took a step back, widening the gap between us. "I'm simply exhausted," I stated, a dull, safe lie. "It's been a brutal day." Something flickered across her features, disappointment, perhaps, or a confirmation of her worst fears. She nodded, mirroring my retreat. "All right," she said softly. "I saved you some paella. It's in the fridge if you want it." She walked away, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the kitchen, weighed down by the entire vocabulary of unspoken words. The decision to end the stalemate was taken out of my hands the next morning. Chapter 5, The Confession of the Absolute Fool. I came downstairs to find Serafina systematically packing her possessions into sturdy cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the living room. "What are you doing, Serafina?" I asked, although the crushing, physical answer was painfully obvious. "Moving out," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She didn't look up from folding a heavy wool sweater. "I found a studio apartment across the lake. It's smaller, but I can afford it now that the steady clients are returning. I'll be gone by Friday." My heart plummeted into the deep cavity of my stomach. The entire, comfortable structure of my life suddenly buckled. "Why? I thought things were working here." She finally looked up. Her eyes were dull with a profound weariness. "They were working. But you've been retreating for weeks, Elias. I can't live somewhere where I feel like my presence is actively disliked. I'd rather be alone than feel unwanted." Unwanted? The word ripped through my carefully constructed self-control. "God, Serafina, you are so wanted it terrifies me." The words tumbled out, uncontrolled, honest. She froze instantly, the wool sweater half folded in her hands. The entire room went silent. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. I ran a hand through my hair, the familiar texture of wood dust under my nails. I knew I was about to either repair everything or shatter it beyond repair. There was no longer any choice. "The reason I've been retreating isn't because I don't want you here," I confessed, the words rushing out in a torrent of long-suppressed truth. "It's because I want you here too much. I want you in ways that violate the terms of our lease agreement. And I was trying to protect our friendship because I convinced myself that's the only context in which you saw me." Serafina gently placed the sweater into the box. Her movements were deliberate, slow. She stared at me, an unreadable intensity in her emerald eyes. "Elias Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I'm saying I'm irrevocably in love with you," I stated, the final, terrifying truth. "I'm saying that somewhere between finding you crying over ruined oatmeal, discussing the symbolic intent of typography, and sharing silent meals, I fell completely and hopelessly for the woman sharing my roof. I know this complicates everything, but I couldn't let you leave believing you were unwanted." She stared for another long moment. I braced myself for the soft, careful rejection, the explanation of why we were better off as platonic allies. Instead, Serafina started to laugh. Not cruel laughter, but a sound born of profound relief, surprise, and absolute absurdity. "Elias Vance," she said, shaking her head. "You magnificent, stubborn fool. I'm sorry." I blinked at her. "Do you have even the faintest idea how long I've been silently hoping you would say something so wonderfully ridiculous?" She took a step closer. "Do you think I started researching antique joinery and reading your copies of T.S. Eliot because the lighting was better in the kitchen? Do you think I always chose the same end of the sofa for our movie nights by coincidence?" My mind struggled to process the seismic shift in the narrative. "You mean? I mean. I've been hopelessly in love with you too, you oblivious man," she whispered, stepping close enough for me to inhale the faint, familiar scent of rosemary and basil from her shampoo. "I've been dropping hints, strategic, obvious, professional hints, for months. The way I would always find an excuse to brush your arm during conversation. The way I stayed up late just to hear the sound of your movements. The way I'd look at you when I thought you were absorbed in a book." I covered her hand with my own, the reality of the moment finally sinking its anchors. "I was paying attention," I admitted, my voice rough. "I was always paying attention." I just thought I was projecting what I desperately wanted to see. So, what happens now? She asked softly. Now that we've both admitted we are utterly inept at reading signals. I looked down at her, this woman who, through quiet, persistent domesticity, had become the absolute center of my world. Now, Serafina Bell, I said, pulling her gently into my arms. I kiss you. If that is acceptable. It is, she breathed against my neck, more than acceptable. I kissed her there in the living room, surrounded by her half-packed boxes, a testament to a communication failure that had nearly cost us everything. It was soft, urgent, and overwhelmingly familiar, like finally coming home to a place I had only ever dreamed of. When we parted, she smiled, her emerald eyes bright with tears of joy. So, she whispered, resting her forehead against mine. I suppose I can unpack my boxes now. Absolutely not, I confirmed. We need to discuss which side of the bed you prefer. And how we are going to tell Aunt Clara that her favorite nephew has been an absolute idiot. She laughed, a full, melodic sound that vibrated against my chest. I thought you'd never ask. Part 2, The Sacred Space. Chapter 6, The Uncomfortable Geometry of Love. That was 5 months ago. 5 months of navigating the challenging, complex geometry of shifting from platonic roommates to lovers sharing a life. It was a transition that required deliberate slowness, respect, and painful honesty. We started carefully. For the first few weeks, Serafina kept her old bedroom as a sanctuary, though she spent almost every night in my bed. We talked late into the early mornings, sharing the deep, vulnerable truths, the fears, the dreams, the past heartbreaks, we had guarded from everyone else. Her books, once strangers on my shelf, migrated to my nightstand. Her artwork replaced my dusty old prints. We decided to convert her old room into a functional, beautiful office for her design work, installing new lighting and custom shelving, a first, symbolic renovation project executed together. However, the path was not a straight line. The domestic comfort we had established as friends was occasionally threatened by the overwhelming intimacy of love. 2 months in, we had our first major conflict. It started subtly, over a miscommunication regarding shared utility payments, and quickly escalated. Serafina, still sensitive from her past relationship, accused me of being controlling, of making decisions about the house's finances and maintenance without full consultation. I, conditioned by years of solitary independence, reacted defensively, accusing her of not taking enough initiative in managing shared responsibilities. This is precisely what I feared, she admitted, tears streaming down her face as we stood in the center of the kitchen, the very stage of our initial connection. This is why I wanted to leave. I knew blending the structure of friendship with the chaos of love was a colossal mistake. Her words, mistake, were a physical blow. So you think this whole relationship was a mistake? I asked, my voice barely steady. I don't know, she cried, the uncertainty worse than rage. Maybe we rushed the emotional component. Maybe we never should have shared a lease. That night, we retreated. Serafina went back to her old room, and I was left alone in the vast, empty expanse of my bedroom for the first time in weeks. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if we were destined to be another statistic, a relationship that imploded when faced with real-world pressure. But in the morning, she was in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked tired, but resolute. I don't want to surrender, Elias, she said, her voice clear. I don't want to be the kind of people who run away when the architecture of a relationship shows its stress points. Neither do I confirmed, meaning it absolutely. We spent that day painstakingly talking through the conflict, establishing ground rules for decision-making and money management, articulating our fears and expectations. It was harder, more demanding than any physical labor I had ever performed, but by the end, our bond felt forged, strengthened by fire. Relationships are just intricate construction work, Serafina observed that evening, her head resting securely on my shoulder. But it's good work. The kind that builds something lasting and true. I love you, I whispered, kissing the top of her head. Even when you're highlighting my worst flaws. Chapter 7, The Grandfather's Workshop. Our conversations became a cornerstone of our relationship. We learned to fight fairly, to address systemic problems before they became crises. Serafina's branding business flourished, securing prestigious, large-scale contracts. I began considering expanding my own work, specializing in high-end restoration projects, just as my grandfather had done. We began to discuss the future in hopeful, careful terms, acknowledging the permanency of what we were building. Serafina subtly began referring to the house as ours, rather than yours, and I started planning renovations based on what we both desired. It was during one of these future-focused planning sessions that Serafina first mentioned the sacred space, my grandfather's workshop. We were lying in bed on a lazy Sunday morning when she brought it up. Elias, she began, tracing the strong line of my collarbone with her finger. I've been thinking about the space above your garage, the secondary workshop. The one your grandfather reserved for his most intricate carving. I nodded. That space was a sanctuary, reserved for delicate work requiring perfect lighting and climate control. I hadn't touched it since his death, it felt too precious, too sacred to disturb. What about it? I asked, wary. Well, I was thinking it might be a phenomenal photography studio, she proposed, propping herself up to meet my eyes. I need to expand into product photography for my clients, and the natural light in that room is unmatched. I know how important that space is to you, but perhaps we could convert it together. Combine your craftsmanship with my vision. The idea, despite my initial protectiveness over the space, resonated deeply. The workshop had been dormant for 2 years. The thought of Serafina breathing new, creative life into that room, combining her modern artistry with the foundational legacy my grandfather left behind, felt profoundly right. Tell me your blueprint, I said, intrigued. Her face ignited with excitement. She detailed the necessary modifications, updating the electrical grid to support professional strobes, implementing climate controls to protect equipment, installing seamless backdrops and custom shooting surfaces. It's a massive investment, Elias, but strategically, it would pay for itself quickly. Over the next weeks, Serafina poured her entire strategic genius into planning the conversion. She produced detailed floor plans, complex cost analyses, and projected revenue streams. I found myself swept up in her enthusiasm. We spent evenings reviewing the technical challenges, imagining the finished space, a shared vision, a joint foundation for our future. Chapter 8, The Blueprint Revealed. The renovation project was the most intense period of our relationship. We worked nights and weekends, fueled by shared coffee and an unspoken competitive spirit. I handled the structural engineering and electrical modifications, ensuring every fixture was securely anchored. Serafina focused on design, aesthetics, and equipment calibration. We learned how seamlessly our differing skills dovetailed, my hands-on precision complementing her analytical, creative foresight. We were building something together, not just renovating a room, but literally constructing a shared future. Yesterday, we finished the functional phase. The specialized lighting was installed, the custom workbenches, repurposed for equipment storage, were in place. All that remained was the final aesthetic setup. Serafina spent the morning alone, arranging the space. I left for a quick job, promising to return by late afternoon. The afternoon dragged on. I checked my phone obsessively, eager for updates. When I returned home, her car was in the driveway, but the house was silent. Her laptop was closed on the dining table. I found her key in the front door, followed by the sound of her moving around in the kitchen. I settled on the couch, respecting her space, listening to the familiar sounds of her presence. Then the phone hummed against the oak table. The message. Elias, please come here. I need to show you something. I rose slowly, my heart rate accelerating. The phrasing was formal, significant. I walked toward the kitchen, my anticipation a palpable thrumming beneath my skin. She was standing with her back to me, facing the window. She had changed into a soft, flowing velvet dress I'd never seen. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves. Her posture suggested a mixture of profound nervousness and resolute determination. "Hey," I said softly, entering the kitchen. "I got your message. What's going on?" She turned, and the intensity in her eyes, excitement mixed with raw, terrifying vulnerability, stopped me cold. "Hi," she whispered, her voice slightly breathless. "The studio, it's not the setup I wanted to show you. It's something else. Something I discovered while working up there today." She moved toward me, stopping just close enough for me to breathe in the delicate, familiar floral scent of her perfume, a scent reserved for rare occasions. "Elias," she said, reaching for my hands. "Do you trust me?" "Of course, I trust you, Serafina." "Why would you ask that?" "Because what I want to show you," she stated, her eyes locking onto mine, "is going to redefine everything between us. I need to know you trust me enough to see it, even if you don't understand the magnitude at first." My pulse hammered. "You are making me exceptionally nervous, Serafina Bell." "Good nervous," she corrected, with a small, trembling smile. "Or bad nervous?" "Good nervous," I replied finally. "Definitely good nervous." "Come with me," she said, pulling me gently toward the staircase. Upstairs. To the sacred space. Chapter 9, The Blueprint of Forever. We climbed the narrow stairs together. The workshop, that hallowed place of my grandfather, felt different. All the custom photography equipment was functional, but Serafina had added quiet, personal touches, a single vase of white jasmine on the workbench, candles flickering on the large, western-facing windowsills, and soft, classical music filling the air. At the center of the room, a large, white backdrop screen was set up. Her laptop sat on a small table, angled away from me. "Serafina," I said, turning to look at her, bewildered. "What is this? A gallery opening?" She stood by the laptop, her hand hovering over the keyboard. Her entire being radiated a singular focus, excitement mixed with absolute, paralyzing fear. "This is me taking the biggest professional and personal risk of my life," she said. "This is me trusting that the blueprint we wrote together is strong enough to handle an unscripted, insane reality." Before I could ask what she meant, she pressed a key. The screen flashed, displaying a professionally rendered 3D photograph. It was a picture of this room. The grandfather's workshop. But utterly transformed. It was decorated for a wedding. Not an elaborate, formal affair, but something intimate, candlelit, and absolutely breathtaking. Flowers, candles, and an archway of salvaged oak branches, cut from the massive tree in our backyard, framed the altar space. I stared, my mind struggling to process the visual information. You rendered the workshop as a wedding venue?" "I rendered it as our wedding venue," Serafina confirmed, her voice now a low, trembling declaration. "This morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the history in this space. Your grandfather's legacy. Our shared creation. It's the perfect place to start a marriage." She pressed another key. A new image appeared, the room set up for a small reception, the workbenches repurposed into serving tables, string lights creating a warm, magical canopy. My heart was beating so violently it threatened to shatter the silence. Marriage. She was talking about marriage. "I created these mock-ups to show you the architectural potential," she continued, advancing the slide to a simple image of a ring box sitting on a polished antique table. "But that isn't really what I wanted to show you." She turned to face me fully. Her eyes were bright, overflowing with tears. "What I wanted to show you," she whispered, reaching into the deep pocket of her velvet dress, "is this." She pulled out a small, navy velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "Timothy Anderson, Elias Vance," she said, her voice shaking slightly with the force of her conviction. "I know this isn't traditional. I know women aren't supposed to propose to men. But I also know that life is short, and love is too precious to be dictated by outdated expectations. I don't want to waste another day. She took a step closer, the ring box held between us like a solemn offering. I want to marry you, Elias. I want to be your wife. And I want us to build a future together that is even more beautiful and lasting than anything we could ever build separately. I stared at the ring, a simple, custom-designed band that perfectly captured Serafina's aesthetic, clean, elegant, understated simplicity. She had designed my ring. I know this is a massive risk, she rushed on, misinterpreting my stunned silence. I know it's fast. And if this isn't what you want, or if you don't see us that way, we can immediately pretend this never happened. But I had to take the risk. I love you, Elias. I love the way you honor the past while constantly building towards the future. Serafina, stop. I said gently, finally finding my voice. I reached up, wiping the tears from her cheeks with the pad of my thumb. You don't have to convince me of anything, I said softly. You already did that 5 months ago, when you asked me to split the groceries with you. She looked up at me, hope and fear warring in her luminous eyes. What do you mean? I carefully took the ring box from her trembling hands, closing it gently. I mean, yes, I said, meeting her gaze. Yes, Serafina Bell. I want to marry you. Yes, I want to be your husband. And yes, I want us to build a life together that is more beautiful than anything either of us could create alone. Serafina's face crumpled entirely, relief and profound joy washing over her features. Really? You're not just saying that to stop me from rambling. I laughed, pulling her into my arms and lifting her slightly off the ground. I'm saying it because I've been thinking the exact same thing for weeks, but I was too much of a structural coward to bring it up. You, my brilliant love, are the best thing that ever walked into this dusty house. So, you like the ring? She asked, muffled against my chest. I love the ring. But more than that, I love what it represents, your courage. And the wedding venue idea? She asked, looking at the laptop screen. I surveyed the room, the hallowed space of my grandfather. I imagined it filled with our friends and family, imagining us exchanging vows where wood and design met. I think it's perfect, Serafina. I think my grandfather would have loved knowing his workshop was the place where we started our marriage. She took the simple band from the box and, with careful reverence, slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. So, we're really doing this? She asked, looking up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We're absolutely doing this, I confirmed, and kissed her, sealing the promise in the sacred space of the workshop. Part 3, The Lasting Structure. Chapter 10, Building the Life Together. We spent the next year meticulously planning our wedding, applying the same focused intensity we had brought to the renovation. Serafina created detailed spreadsheets, tracking every vendor and timeline. I handled the final structural aesthetics, ensuring the workshop's infrastructure was ready to host the event. We established a rule: every decision had to feel like a joint construction, where both our visions were equally represented. We sampled artisanal cakes, curated playlists, and designed the invitations together. Serafina's family, initially skeptical of the roommate-turned-fiancé story, visited and were immediately charmed. Her father, a retired engineer, was fascinated by the structural challenges of converting the workshop. Her mother, pragmatic and detail-oriented, loved Serafina's meticulous planning spreadsheets. My own family, especially my Aunt Clara, was equally supportive. She appointed herself the unofficial reception coordinator, insisting on handling all the food preparation. My cousin, Leo, volunteered for setup and teardown. Your grandfather would be beaming, Elias, Aunt Clara said one afternoon as we finalized the ceremony layout. He always said this room had good energy. It was meant for important moments. As the wedding day approached, the workshop became a space of profound transformation. We preserved the elements that made it special, the high windows, the scent of aged wood, while adding the necessary elegance for a celebration. The wedding morning dawned clear and bright, the perfect Seattle spring day. I woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent the morning helping with the final setup. By noon, the workshop was transformed into an intimate sanctuary. The salvaged oak archway framed the altar space. Our close friends and family, 40 people maximum, just as we planned, began to arrive. At exactly 3 o'clock, the music began. I took my place at the altar with Leo, my best man. The workshop doors opened, and Serafina appeared, radiant in a vintage-inspired gown that captured her love for clean lines and timeless design. She walked down the aisle alone, choosing to approach our partnership as an individual, her eyes locked on mine with an expression of pure, unadulterated joy. When she reached me, she placed her bouquet on the workbench and took my hands. "Hi," she whispered. "Hello," I managed, squeezing her hands gently. Chapter 11, The Vows of Partnership. The officiant, my reserved Uncle Harold, began the ceremony, speaking of the geometry of love and the necessity of maintenance. But I barely heard him, consumed by the sight of Serafina, marveling that this incredible woman had chosen me as her lifelong partner. When it was time for our vows, Serafina spoke first, her voice clear and strong. She promised love through all challenges. She spoke about the workshop, how it represented the combination of my enduring craftsmanship and her strategic innovation. When it was my turn, I found myself thinking about that tearful morning, nearly 2 years prior, when I'd found her crying over oatmeal. That moment of shared vulnerability had been the true beginning of our construction project. I promised to always be the safe haven she needed, the foundation she could rely on. I promised to support her ambitious dreams and to challenge her self-doubt. I promised to love her not just in the effortless, quiet moments, but especially when the blueprint of life inevitably tore. By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, Uncle Harold announced, a broad, genuine smile spreading across his face, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride." I kissed Serafina as our family erupted in cheers and applause. In that moment, surrounded by love and celebration, in the very space where my grandfather had created beautiful things, I knew we were embarking on the greatest adventure of our lives. The reception was a joyous, bustling affair. Aunt Clara's food was legendary. The toasts were hilarious and heartfelt. Late in the evening, Serafina and I stole a few quiet moments alone in the workshop. The space was now quiet, empty of guests, but still glowing with the magic of our wedding day. We stood together in the center of the room, holding each other close. "We did it," Serafina sighed softly. "We're actually married." "Best construction project I ever signed on to," I replied, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, husband," she murmured. "I love you, too, wife," I confirmed, and kissed her again in the space where our new life had officially commenced. Chapter 12, The Continual Construction. Now, months later, as we settle into married life in the house that has become definitively ours, I realize that Serafina is still showing me things every day. We learned that love is not about two perfect halves finding each other, it's about two imperfect wholes agreeing to be partners in construction. I think back to that text message that started this entire story. The simple, nonverbal plea that led to an extraordinary moment of truth. "Elias, please come here. I need to show you something." Such ordinary words that preceded an unscripted, beautiful future. And I am grateful, every single morning, that I honored the summons. I am grateful that I walked into the kitchen and allowed Serafina Bell to show me a life, and a blueprint, far more beautiful and enduring than anything I could have ever drawn on my own. The construction continues, forever ongoing, and forever worth the effort. The end of the legal battle wasn't peace, it was a grueling truce. The divorce proceedings between Ricardo and Sylvia dragged on, filled with lingering bitterness. Resentful Sylvia tried to use every technicality to complicate Ricardo's life, but attorney Torres, with Elena's support, thwarted her every move. I dedicated myself to working on the next level of reconstruction, the emotional one. Ricardo, although now free of Sylvia and the legal risk, was devastated. He had lost his status, his financial security, and, most importantly, his idealized self-image. "I don't know what to tell my therapist, Mom," Ricardo confessed to me one Saturday afternoon, sitting in my garden, where he no longer dared to enter without my invitation. "She asks me about the anger I felt, and the truth is, it wasn't anger toward you. It was anger toward myself, for having fallen so low. For having broken my promise to Dad. The pain of guilt is necessary, son," I told him, as I pruned the jasmine vine. It was a metaphor that brought me peace. The rotten had to be cut away so that the healthy could bloom. Your father didn't want you to be perfect, he wanted you to be honest. And honesty begins with looking in the mirror. I helped him get a job at the warehouse. A physical, humble job that he didn't like, but at Washington his salary was low, but for the first time, the money was the fruit of his own labor, not from my checkbook or a fraudulent mortgage. "This money," he told me one afternoon, showing me his first check, "smells like sweat. And it feels better than everything Sylvia and I spent." That was the first act of redemption that allowed me to glimpse the possibility of a future. Forgiveness, I discovered, was not a magical event, it was a succession of small acts of reparation. I had forgiven him the night I signed the revocation, but he needed to forgive himself, and he could only do that through hard work and honesty. Chapter 22, Sylvia's Mirror. Valeria's custody trial became the final test. Ricardo, supported by my testimony regarding Sylvia's instability and financial abuse, proved to be the more stable father. The joint custody ruling, with primary residence at Ricardo's house, was a devastating blow to Sylvia. She had planned to use Valeria as a bargaining chip for the rest of her life, and that weapon was taken from her. The encounter at the supermarket I described earlier was the turning point. Days after that encounter, I received a call from Carla, Sylvia's cousin. "Mrs. Elena, Sylvia asked me to tell you that she's accepted a job in another city. She wants a fresh start." "And Valeria?" "She's given Ricardo full custody for now. She says she needs to get her life in order first. That she can't be a good mother if she can't be a good person." The news took my breath away. Sylvia, the woman who had humiliated me, was making a genuine sacrifice for her daughter. Weeks later, I received that unexpected call from Sylvia. Not to ask for a favor, but to say thank you. For not letting me get away with it. For being the mirror where I had to see myself, even though I didn't like what I saw. We hung up. I felt a complex sadness. Sylvia wasn't a one-dimensional monster, she was a woman who had learned to use power and ambition as a survival mechanism. Her path to redemption would be long and lonely, but for the first time, she was walking in the right direction. Chapter 23, The Ritual of Reconstruction. Ricardo rented his new apartment with the money I lent him for the deposit, a debt that he insisted on documenting and paying rigorously. We went together to buy the second-hand crib. A solid, fine piece of wood. Ricardo spent 2 weeks restoring it. He sanded it, varnished it, and left it spotless. It was his silent tribute to Javier, the restorer. "What do you think, Mother?" she asked me the afternoon she installed it in Valeria's room. "That it's perfect, son. That your father would be here, paintbrush in hand, saying that it needed a little sandpaper on the right leg." Ricardo smiled, the first relaxed smile I'd seen from him in years. "You say it or he does, Mother." "Both. But he would say it with more affection." Those conversations, full of humor and references to Javier, were the invisible threads with which we wove a new kind of relationship. A mature relationship, where I was his advisor, not his savior, and he was my son, but also a man fighting for his integrity. The day Ricardo picked Valeria up to take her to her new home was a milestone. I was there. I saw the light in my granddaughter's eyes. "Dad! My yellow room!" Valeria ran around the humble apartment, touching everything, making it her own. Ricardo sat on the floor, exhausted but happy. "It's a lot, Mother. It's a lot of responsibility." "It's your responsibility, son. And you're going to make mistakes. We all do. But now you have to look at her and remember what you can't afford to lose. And Ricardo looked at me, then at Valeria, and understood that responsibility was the driving force of his new life. Chapter 24, The Lesson of the Jasmine. Years passed. My garden in Del Valle became a refuge. The jasmine, which had witnessed my pain and my blindness, now bloomed with an intensity that almost frightened me. Valeria grew up. For years, then 5. Sundays at my house were a healing ritual. Ricardo would arrive at 10 o'clock sharp, knock on the door, and hug me. My son's kiss was no longer a gesture of obligation or manipulation, it was an act of restored love. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching Valeria chase butterflies. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Sure, son." "Do you ever think about what happened to us? About whether we could have prevented it?" "I think about it every day, Ricardo. And the only way I could have prevented it was if I had broken my promise to your father. To not indulge me." "Yes. I rescued you from every consequence. I taught you that life always has a safety net. And when Sylvia came along, you saw her as an extension of that net, a new source of rescue and pleasure. When I refused, you felt your survival was at risk. I was a big, ambitious, and spoiled kid. You were a man who believed that unconditional love meant that love had no limits. And it cost me my soul to teach you that love without limits isn't love, it's mutual destruction." Ricardo nodded. He got up and brought me a cup of freshly brewed coffee. "I love you, Mother. And I'm so sorry I hurt you." "I know, son. I know." That night, I was left alone. I understood the difference between imposed loneliness and true loneliness. Chosen solitude. I had chosen my dignity, my peace. Chapter 25, The End of the Chronicle. Today, my life is complete. Valeria is 7 years old and reads the books I catalog for her. Ricardo is a present and responsible father. He still works at the winery, but he's saving up to open his own business, a small restoration workshop, like his grandfather's. Sylvia called me a year ago from the city where she had moved. "Donna Elena, I'm fine. I opened my own pastry shop and cafe. I called it Jasmine, it's a beautiful name." "I know. It reminds me that beauty always returns, even after a winter." We didn't talk about Ricardo. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about life, about recipes, about small daily victories. And in that moment, there was a respect that had been absent in 3 years of marriage. Valeria has just entered the room, she climbs onto my lap with a storybook. "Grandma, will you read to me? The one about the brave princess?" I smile. "It's the story of a princess who has to face a dragon." "Did he defeat him?" Valeria asks. "Yes, my love. He defeated him. Not with a sword, but with something more powerful. With the truth and with the decision to no longer be afraid." "Did you also defeat a dragon, Grandma?" "Yes, my dear. I also defeated a dragon." "And were you happy afterward?" I look out the window. The sun is setting. The jasmine is still blooming. Ricardo is in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Yes, my love. I was happy. Not always, not perfectly, but I was happy because I was finally free." My story ends here. If my story, Elena Rivas's story, helps even one woman break her silence, helps one mother set a boundary before it's too late, then the pain will have been worthwhile. Because the truth always finds its way. And justice, sooner or later, always prevails.